I raised my son Jake to value hard work, just as my father taught me. I believed patience and discipline could carry a man farther than luck ever would. But somewhere along the way, Jake fell in love with shortcuts. What started as innocent dice games with his college friends slowly grew into something darker. Soon he was glued to his phone, betting on sports he'd never watched, playing poker with strangers online. Each night I heard him pacing his room, muttering at his screen. Every loss came with the same promise. "This is the last time, Dad. I swear it's my last game." But promises mean nothing when addiction holds the wheel. I watched my son disappear into a stranger who only cared about fast money. And fast money, I knew, never lasts. I didn't yet realize how far his hunger for quick cash would take him. Just before you continue to watch, Joe would like you to subscribe to this channel and like this video. It would encourage him to keep his streak of thrilling revenge stories for you to watch. All right, back to the story. Every gambling loss should have humbled him, but instead it hardened him like concrete. Jake stopped filling out job applications, claiming he was working on something big. He skipped family dinners, avoided eye contact, and spent entire days locked in his room with those glowing screens. His mother Susan begged me to stay patient. "Let him figure himself out," she'd whisper. "He's still young." But I'd been patient for 2 years, watching our savings shrink as Jake borrowed emergency money that never got paid back. His younger sister, Ashley, started asking why Jake never talked to us anymore. His brother Chris openly called him a loser. The family was fracturing, and Jake didn't seem to care. All he wanted was another bet, another chance, another shot at easy money. Then came the night my patience nearly ran out for good. That Tuesday evening, I spent 3 hours polishing my 1967 Mustang in the garage. This wasn't just any car. It was my inheritance from my father, a classic beauty we'd restored together when I was Jake's age. Each bolt, every piece of chrome, every drop of paint carried memories of weekend mornings in Dad's garage. He taught me that real things are built slow, with care and patience. "Son," he used to say, "anything worth having takes time." Under the fluorescent lights, the Mustang's deep blue paint gleamed like water. I ran my hands over the hood, remembering how proud Dad was when we first fired up that engine. To me, this car wasn't just steel and rubber. It was legacy, discipline, and proof that craftsmanship beats shortcuts every time. After covering it with its protective tarp, I headed to bed feeling proud and peaceful. I didn't know my son's desperate eyes were already planning its theft. While I slept soundly upstairs, Jake sat in the living room with his phone glowing in the darkness. He'd lost $800 that night, money he'd borrowed from his friend's dad and promised to pay back by Friday. Panic clawed at his chest as he scrolled through his contacts looking for someone else to borrow from. Everyone had already said no. That's when his eyes drifted toward the garage where my Mustang sat under its cover. In his twisted, desperate logic, he thought, "One sale and all my troubles disappear." His fingers moved fast across the screen, taking photos from his memory, writing a description that made the car sound like his own project. "Restored classic, excellent condition, must sell this week," he typed. He posted it on 3 different selling apps, his heart pounding with guilt and excitement. Within 20 minutes, his phone buzzed with the first response. A stranger wanted to meet tomorrow evening to see the car. When I woke up Wednesday morning, something felt wrong. Call it a mechanic's instinct, the same gut feeling that spots a loose bolt before it falls. Jake stumbled to the bathroom, leaving his phone charging on the kitchen counter. I shouldn't have looked, but that nagging feeling wouldn't quit. One glance at his screen showed me everything. Messages about my car with meeting times and dollar amounts that made my blood run cold. Some stranger named Kevin wanted to meet at Romano's restaurant at 7 p.m. to complete the transaction. My hand shook as I read Jake's responses, each one digging the lie deeper.
He'd told this Kevin that the car was definitely his, that he had all the paperwork, that cash only was perfect. I set the phone down carefully, my vision blurring with rage. My blood boiled, but I stopped myself from bursting into his room and dragging him out by the collar.
For 10 long minutes, I stood in that kitchen, planning exactly how I'd confront Jake. I imagined storming upstairs, yanking him out of bed, and shoving his phone in his face while demanding answers. My fists clenched, thinking about his lies, his betrayal, his willingness to steal from his own father. The urge to explode felt overwhelming, like pressure building in a boiler. But then, as my breathing slowed, another thought crept into my mind. What if I let Jake walk straight into his own trap? What if instead of lecturing him about his mistakes, I let him learn through pure shame? The idea felt cold and calculating, but also perfectly just. Jake wanted to play games with my property? Fine, I'd play a game too, but mine would have rules he'd never forget. That's when I decided to flip the script entirely and teach him a lesson that would cut deeper than any punishment. I memorized Kevin's phone number and sent him a text from my own phone an hour later. "Hi, Kevin. This is about the Mustang. I need to explain something important. Can you call me?" When Kevin called back, I told him the truth. The car wasn't Jake's to sell. I explained that Jake was my son, that he had a gambling problem, and that he was trying to steal from his own family. I expected Kevin to hang up, to want nothing to do with family drama. Instead, his voice turned hard with anger. "I hate people like that," he said. "Someone tried to sell me a motorcycle that wasn't theirs last year. Cost me $2,000 before I figured it out." Kevin wasn't just decent, he was furious on my behalf. When I asked if he'd help me teach Jake a lesson, he agreed immediately. "What do you need me to do?" Together, we hatched a plan my son would never see coming. If Jake wanted to put on a performance, then I'd give him an audience he'd never forget. I called his mother Susan first, then his sister Ashley, his brother Chris, and finally my girlfriend Maria. "I need you all to meet me for dinner at Romano's restaurant tonight at 6:30, I told each of them. "It's important. You need to see something." They pressed for details, but I kept it vague. "Tonight, you'll see Jake's true face," I said simply. Susan sounded worried. Ashley asked if Jake was in trouble. Chris just sighed and said he'd be there. Maria, who'd watched Jake's gambling destroy family dinners for months, agreed, without questions. None of them knew what was coming, only that I sounded more serious than I had in years. The stage was set for Jake's grand performance, and he had no clue he was walking into a trap that would expose him in front of everyone who mattered. At 6:30 sharp, we gathered around a large table at Romano's restaurant like it was just another family dinner. Susan ordered her usual chicken parmesan, Ashley got a Caesar salad, Chris went with pasta, and Maria chose the fish special. I could barely taste my food. My eyes kept flicking to the front door, watching for Jake to arrive. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The conversation flowed around me. Work stories, weekend plans, Ashley's college classes, but my mind was elsewhere, rehearsing what would happen in 30 minutes. Susan noticed my distraction. "Are you feeling okay?" she asked, reaching across to touch my hand. "You seem nervous." I managed a tight smile, just waiting for something important. The family exchanged confused glances but kept eating. None of them suspected that their normal Tuesday dinner was about to become an unforgettable lesson in consequences. Then the front door opened and Jake walked in.
Jake strutted through Romano's front door like he owned the place, that fake confidence radiating from every step. His chest was puffed out, his shoulders thrown back, wearing his lucky gambling shirt and a grin I recognized from his winning streaks. Behind him walked Kevin, playing his role perfectly, carrying a thick manila envelope that looked stuffed with cash. Jake's eyes immediately locked onto that envelope like a hungry wolf spotting fresh meat. He didn't even notice our family table in his peripheral vision. All his attention was on the money he thought was about to solve all his problems. They took seats at the bar, and I watched Jake's whole body language change. He was practically vibrating with excitement, his hands gesturing wildly as he talked to Kevin. I could see him pointing toward the parking lot, probably describing where his car was parked. His greed was so obvious it made me sick. And Kevin, bless him, played along beautifully, nodding and tapping that envelope like bait in front of a starving fish.
Kevin stood up from the bar and spoke loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "Here's the cash," he announced, shaking that thick envelope like he was calling a dog to dinner. $15,000, just like we agreed. Jake's eyes went wide as dinner plates, his breathing quick and shallow, his hands actually twitching toward the money. The entire restaurant seemed to pause, forks stopping halfway to mouths, conversations trailing off mid-sentence. Everyone could sense something unusual happening. Jake reached for that envelope like it was a lifeline, like it held salvation from all his debts and problems. His fingers were inches away when Kevin suddenly pulled back. His eyes scanned the room until they found mine. A slow smile spread across Kevin's face as he delivered the line we'd rehearsed. "But before I hand this over," Kevin said, his voice carrying across the silent restaurant, "shouldn't we confirm this with the real owner?" The air in Romano's turned thick as cement. Complete silence fell over the restaurant like a heavy blanket. Jake's hand froze in mid-reach, suspended awkwardly in the air between him and the money. Every customer, every waiter, every person in that place turned to look at our table. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. Slowly, dramatically, I stood up from my chair. My family's eyes followed me, confusion written across their faces. Susan's mouth fell open. Ashley grabbed Chris's arm. Maria leaned forward, suddenly understanding that this dinner was no coincidence. All eyes in the restaurant tracked my movement as I walked toward the bar where my son sat frozen in shame. My voice was calm and clear when I spoke, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Yes," I said, looking directly at Jake's horrified face, "you should definitely confirm it with me, because that car is mine. It's always been mine, and tonight, everyone here is going to know exactly what my son tried to do." The sound of gasps rippled through Romano's like a wave hitting the shore. Susan's hands flew to cover her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Ashley whispered, "Oh my God," over and over, staring at Jake like she'd never seen him before. Chris just shook his head slowly, his face twisted with disgust and disappointment. Maria sat back in her chair, her expression confirming she'd suspected something like this was coming. Other diners turned in their seats, openly staring at the drama unfolding at the bar. Jake's face went through a rainbow of colors, red with embarrassment, white with fear, green with nausea. He opened his mouth to speak, to explain, to make excuses, but no words came out. His tongue seemed stuck to the roof of his mouth. The confident swagger from 5 minutes ago had evaporated completely, leaving behind a scared kid caught red-handed, stealing from his own family. His eyes darted around the room looking for an escape route that didn't exist. Kevin shook his head with pure disgust and shoved that envelope back into his jacket pocket like it was contaminated. "Quick money, huh? You were ready to sell your father's soul for a handful of bills." The words hit Jake like physical slaps across the face. $15,000 for something that doesn't belong to you. Do you have any idea what kind of person that makes you? Jake's carefully constructed mask of confidence cracked wide open, revealing the desperate, ashamed boy underneath. His shoulders sagged, his head dropped, and his hands started shaking. The whole restaurant watched as my son's arrogance shattered into a million pieces. Several people were openly staring now, some shaking their heads in disapproval, others whispering to their dinner companions about what they'd just witnessed. Jake's face went through a rainbow of colors, red with embarrassment, white with fear, green with nausea. He opened his mouth to speak, to explain, to make excuses, but no words came out. His tongue seemed stuck to the roof of his mouth.
The confident swagger from 5 minutes ago had evaporated completely,
leaving behind a scared kid caught red-handed stealing from his own family. His eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. Kevin shook his head with pure disgust and shoved the envelope back into his jacket pocket like it was contaminated. "Quick money, huh?" he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You were ready to sell your father's soul for a handful of bills." The words hit Jake like physical slaps across the face. $15,000 for something that doesn't belong to you? Do you have any idea what kind of person that makes you? Jake's carefully constructed mask of confidence cracked wide open, revealing the desperate, ashamed boy underneath. His shoulders sagged, his head dropped, and his hands started shaking. The whole restaurant watched as my son's arrogance shattered into a million pieces. Several people were openly staring now, some shaking their heads in disapproval, others whispering to their dinner companions about what they'd just witnessed. Jake looked smaller somehow, like he was shrinking into himself, trying to disappear from all the judging eyes. The humiliation was burning him alive from the inside out. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't curse or threaten or strike him. I simply stood there, letting the weight of disappointment fill the air between us like toxic gas. My silence was louder than any lecture could have been, heavier than any punishment I could have given him. Jake kept looking at me, waiting for the explosion, the anger, the shouting match he could fight against. But I gave him nothing except quiet, devastating disappointment. The restaurant held its collective breath, waiting for me to tear into him. Instead, I just stood there, my arms crossed, my face calm but cold as winter. That silence crushed him more completely than any words could have. You could actually see it happening, his spirit breaking under the weight of what he'd tried to do. His breathing became shallow and quick, like he was suffocating on his own shame. The lesson was sinking in deeper than any lecture ever could have.
Susan was the first to break the terrible silence, her voice trembling with hurt and confusion. "Jake, how could you do this?" she whispered, tears starting to run down her cheeks. "How could you try to steal from your own father?" Ashley covered her face with her hands, embarrassed to be related to him. "I can't believe this," she said through her fingers. "I actually defended you to my friends when they said you were a loser." Chris's voice was flat and cold. "You're not my brother anymore. Brothers don't steal from their family." Even Maria, who usually stayed out of family drama, shook her head in disgust. "Jake, I've watched your father work on that car for 15 years. I've seen how much it means to him. And you were just going to sell it like it was nothing?" Jake opened his mouth desperately, looking for words that might save him, might explain away what everyone had witnessed. But there were no magic words that could undo this betrayal. He looked at me one last time, hoping for rescue, for forgiveness, for anything. I gave him nothing but cold, hard silence. Jake slumped into the nearest chair like all the air had been knocked out of his lungs. His hands were visibly shaking now, trembling like leaves in a storm. A plate of food sat in front of him at the bar, something he'd ordered while waiting for his big score, but he couldn't even look at it. The smell of food seemed to make him nauseous. Around us, the restaurant was slowly returning to normal, but conversations stayed hushed, and many eyes kept drifting back to our table. The waiter approached cautiously, unsure whether to clear the plates or give us more time. Jake's appetite had vanished completely, replaced by the sick feeling of knowing everyone in his family now saw him for what he really was. He kept his head down, staring at his hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The lesson was sinking in deep, carving itself into his memory where it would stay forever. No lecture could have taught him this lesson better than his own public humiliation. After Kevin left with a disgusted shake of his head, I stood up from our table and calmly walked toward the exit. My family followed in stunned silence, their footsteps heavy on the restaurant floor. Outside in the parking lot, I slowly pulled the protective cover off my Mustang, revealing its gleaming blue paint under the streetlights. The chrome bumpers reflected the light like mirrors, and the leather seats looked perfect through the windows. This was what Jake had been willing to sell for gambling money. 15 years of my work,
my father's legacy, my pride and joy. I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, listening to it purr with satisfaction. My family got into their own cars one by one, still processing what they'd witnessed inside. Susan was crying. Ashley looked angry. Chris just seemed disgusted. Maria squeezed my shoulder before getting in her car. But Jake hesitated at the curb, unsure whether he was still welcome in the family car, unsure if he even deserved a ride home. I sat in my Mustang with the engine running, but I didn't unlock the passenger door. Jake stood on the sidewalk, shifting from foot to foot, his hands in his pockets, waiting for permission to get in. For 2 full minutes, I let him stand there in the cool evening air, thinking about what he'd done, feeling the sting of being left behind. His pride wanted him to walk away, to storm off and prove he didn't need anyone. But his shame kept him rooted to that spot, hoping for forgiveness he hadn't earned yet. My family finished getting into their cars, engines starting, headlights turning on. One by one, they pulled out of the parking lot and headed home. I was the last to leave, and Jake watched with growing panic as I put the Mustang in reverse. For the first time in years, he was experiencing real consequences for his actions. The empty passenger seat spoke louder than any words could have. As I drove away, I saw him in my rearview mirror, standing alone under the streetlight, finally understanding that shame doesn't fade quickly. The drive home felt longer than usual, stretching through familiar neighborhoods that looked different in the darkness. Streetlights painted moving shadows across my windshield as I replayed the evening's events. Jake's arrogance when he'd walked in, his greed when he saw the money, his complete collapse when the truth came out. My hands gripped the steering wheel steady but heavy, feeling the weight of what I'd done. This wasn't just about teaching a lesson anymore. This was about reclaiming my role as his father, about showing him that actions have consequences, about proving that respect isn't automatically given to family members who betray you. I'd spent 2 years watching Jake slide deeper into gambling addiction, making excuses for him, enabling his behavior by giving him emergency loans that never got repaid. Tonight, that ended. I had reclaimed not just my car, but my authority as his father. And Jake would either learn from this humiliation or break under the weight of it.
That night, sleep was impossible. I sat in my garage until 3 in the morning, staring at the Mustang, running my hands over its smooth paint and thinking about my father's words. "A man who takes shortcuts," Dad used to say, "only shortens his life." Jake had tried to take the ultimate shortcut tonight, stealing from his own family to pay gambling debts. The damage wasn't just about money or property. Trust, once broken, never returns the same way. He comes back cracked, weaker, requiring constant testing. I thought about all the times I'd believed Jake's promises to quit gambling, all the emergency loans I'd given him, all the family dinners he'd missed because he was chasing another big win. Had I enabled this by being too patient? Had my love actually made him worse? The garage was quiet, except for the tick of cooling metal and the distant hum of the refrigerator. In that silence, I wondered if Jake would ever truly understand what he'd tried to take from me tonight. The next morning, Jake appeared in my garage doorway like a ghost. His eyes were swollen and red from crying. His voice cracked and barely above a whisper. "Dad, I'm sorry," he said, the words tumbling out desperately. "I'm so sorry. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. I was just so scared about the money I owed, and I thought if I could just sell the car, I could pay everyone back and start over." He kept talking, stumbling over apologies and explanations, begging for forgiveness with the desperation of someone who'd finally realized what they'd lost. I listened to every word, but I didn't respond. I just kept polishing my car, running the cloth over paint that was already perfect. Forgiveness, I knew from experience, couldn't be rushed or demanded. Like the car's restoration, trust had to be rebuilt slowly, piece by piece, with patience and consistency. When Jake finished talking, I left him standing there in the doorway, unsure if I'd ever forgive him, wondering if our relationship could survive what he'd done. In the days that followed, Jake's behavior changed completely. No more late nights with glowing phone screens, no more whispered arguments with bookies, no more desperate searches for quick money. He kept his head down around the house, avoiding eye contact with everyone, speaking only when spoken to. The humiliation from Romano's had scarred him, at least temporarily. He stopped hanging around with his gambling buddies, avoided the sports bars where he used to place bets, and actually started looking at job applications for the first time in months. Susan watched him carefully, unsure whether this change was real or just another performance. Ashley still wouldn't talk to him. Chris acted like he didn't exist. Even Maria kept her distance, uncertain whether Jake's shame would last or fade like his previous promises. The whole family was waiting, watching for cracks in his new behavior, wondering if the lesson had truly sunk in or if this was just another temporary fix before the next relapse. 2 weeks later, I was back in the garage polishing the Mustang's chrome bumpers with special care. The evening light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Jake appeared in the doorway again, silent this time, just watching me work. I didn't invite him in, didn't offer him a polishing cloth, didn't start a conversation. Instead, I let my father's voice echo in my memory. "Patience always wins in the end." I said the words loud, more to myself than to Jake, but loud enough for him to hear. He stood there for 10 minutes, watching me work, perhaps remembering the times that he was younger and actually helped me care for the car. But those days felt like a lifetime ago, back when I trusted him, back when he valued things besides quick money. Now, I wasn't sure if those days would ever return. As I worked, I realized something important. This battle between us was mine to win, but the war against his addiction was his to fight, alone. 3 weeks after the restaurant incident, I took the Mustang out for a long drive through the countryside at sunset. The engine purred like a satisfied cat. The road stretched wide and empty ahead of me, and the first streetlights of evening flickered on as I headed home. Behind me, I could see my family following in their separate cars. Susan, Ashley, Chris, and Maria, all united in a silence that felt both sad and cleansing. Jake wasn't with us that night. He'd stay at home alone, still carrying the weight of his shame, still working to rebuild trust he'd shattered in one desperate moment. As I drove through those familiar streets, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete peace with my decisions. Jake had played with betrayal, thinking he could steal from his own father without consequences. But I had answered his betrayal, with patience, with planning, with a lesson that would stay with him forever. And patience, I knew now more than ever, always wins in the end. The engine's rhythm was steady and strong, just like my resolve to never again let anyone take advantage of my love. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, comment, and smash the subscribe button. Also, check out other videos on the channel. Joe's got more interesting stories for you.